Welcome to The Secrets of Success. By following the proven techniques of the guests who appear on this series, you'll learn that even successful people run into detours and failures, and how you can apply their success techniques to change your life.
You're now listening to the most unique show on radio, the show dedicated to making you a success. Your teacher told you to pay attention. Today, Dr. Gloria Mark will show us how. Dr. Mark, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Mark, you've written a wonderful book. I'm certainly enjoying it. The title is Attention Span. And I'm just amazed because we've been on for 34 years. This is the first time I've seen a book on attention. Is this a new hot topic now?
I've been studying this for over 20 years. But, I live in an academic world, so I've been publishing this in academic papers. And so now I've stepped out of the academic world and I'm publishing this for the general public. I'm sure every teacher loves you now for this book because, of course, they've been telling us, pay attention, students, listen, give us your undivided attention. We've heard that, 6 times a day, at least for every student, and now you've done it. We hear the word attention, and in many other books, we see the word focus. Are attention and focus the same thing, or is that two different categories? So attention is much broader than focus, right? When people think of attention, they think of two different states. You can be focused or unfocused. And what we found is that the story is a lot more complicated than that. So you can be engaged in something and be very challenged. You're trying to read a hard book. So you really have to use a lot of mental energy. But you can also be engaged in something and not at all challenged, like when we play solitaire, or for people who play Candy Crush or who look at social media. You can also be not engaged and not challenged, and that's a state of boredom. You can also be very challenged to do something, but you're just not engaged. And we call that a state of frustration. Like if I have a tech problem, I'm just challenged, but I'm not engaged in solving it. I love that term, a state of frustration. I was waiting for a very technical term, and it's something we experience, I think, all of us every day. Now, you mentioned in your book that in the last 2 decades, human minds have undergone a striking change in how they focus on information. Can you tell us about that? Because somehow we would think that that's one of those things that doesn't change. It might be more a different format, but it would be the same. So how have things changed? So what we found, and we first started studying this about 20 years ago, we find that people's ability to pay attention when they're using their devices, that ability has diminished. So back in 2004, we found that people averaged about 2.5 minutes on any screen before switching. At the time, it astonished me. I thought, wow, this is way, way shorter than I had imagined. I experienced it myself, but I didn't realize that, it applied to so many other people. But over the years, we kept tracking this, and we were tracking it empirically, so we could measure it in objective ways. And we find that in the last 5 or 6 years, people average about 47 seconds on any screen before switching. This is the average. If we look at the midpoint of our observations, that's 40 seconds. That means half of all of the observations show people paying less than 40 seconds. And I call this kind of rapid switching of attention kinetic. It's dynamic. I call it kinetic attention because I think it represents this idea of people, shifting their attention from apps to email to social media back to another app and so on. Health-wise, is that having an effect on us that we're getting so much information as opposed to when I was reading your book, I'm thinking of the blacksmith. How much information? He's hacking away at, putting on the horseshoe, and maybe someone came in and said weather looks bad today or rain is coming in or something like that, but relatively minor amounts that would come in. And even as we moved up in time, the paper that would come out in the morning and the afternoon, relatively small. Now, wherever we go, you go into a restaurant, a store, a doctor's office, there's a TV on, there's announcements, there's music. It almost seems like an assault to us.
But is that doing something either good or bad to our health?
Well, we know that switching our attention so rapidly, which is multitasking, we know that it causes stress. We know there's a causal factor there. So the faster people switch their attention, the more stressed they get. We've known this from decades of laboratory research. We know that blood pressure rises. There's a physiological marker in the body that indicates people are more stressed. In my work, where we study people in a workplace, we've gone to various workplaces. We see that when they wear heart rate monitors, they indicate that stress is increased as people are shifting their attention very fast. So yes, and we know that there are consequences of experiencing stress for long periods.
Now, I think all of us are always amazed if we find out and someone on an internet will say, I'm an influencer. And I'm not sure of the definition of that, but usually somewhere in there it comes out that they have a very large number of followers, whatever that might be for the particular person, 10,000, 700,000, maybe in the hundreds of thousands. And they're putting this out there for us. Is this something we have to deal with today? Because we're getting this all over. There's people talking to us. There's little ribbons below when I'm watching TV. There's something on the side. And I'm not even just looking like I'm looking at you right now. I have 4 things calling for my attention.
Yeah, that's right. So there's so many external distractors in our digital environments. But I also want to stress that, yes, we do get distracted by flashing notifications, by text chimes and so on. But we're just as likely to interrupt ourselves as to be interrupted from something that's external to us. And the reason why these notifications capture our attention is because it taps into what's called automatic attention. And that means we can't help but be attracted to something that's blinking or that's moving across the screen. If you're driving and all of a sudden a light turns yellow, the traffic light turns yellow, that's our automatic attention kicking in that causes us to brake, or we should brake, right? There's this combination of external distractors, but also things internal to us that distract us. We distract ourselves.
What would be some of the things that would surprise us about how, I guess, electronic devices and maybe other things and other media gets our attention, and maybe we're not even aware of it? Now, I'll throw something in at the end, but I want to hear from you first.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, any kind of notification. Now, of course, targeted algorithms that use our information that we leave behind when we go on the web, they use this information to construct a profile about us, to understand. These algorithms are so-called understanding what our personalities are, and it's being used to target information to us. So if I'm someone who's an introvert, I might get a particular ad targeted at, what might attract me as an introvert. Right. And it's hard not to pay attention when an ad is so personalized and so directed toward something that's just so basic to ourselves.
I was listening to a sports show a few months ago, and they had mentioned that someone on the show had talked about a very unusual topic, impacted earwax, which I don't think I've ever heard the term before or since. And yet within 5 minutes of when they talked about it, they were actually getting ads on their cell phone. So does our cell phone, is that listening to us and we don't even know that?
Yes, a lot of people will claim that that's the case. It's a little bit controversial, but I have heard people claim that they would be talking about a topic and then all of a sudden they would get an ad for it. We don't know if it's coincidence or if there's intent behind it.
And I guess since our phones have the directional, the GPS on it, that it does know where we are, because often I'll pass a store and right when I'm just getting near that store, and it's not the usual store that I'd pass, I'll get something that says 20% off if you come in by noon or after 6 or something like that. So it does know where we are. And
Yes.
it knows I'm close to the athletic store or the Nike store or whatever shopping center I'm in.
Yeah, we're in the digital world.
And it's following us all over. Before we go further, Dr. Mark, I'd like to let our audience know that you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan. Our guest today is Dr. Gloria Mark. Her book is Attention Span. And Dr. Mark, I'd like to ask you, is there a website where we can find out more information?
Yes, you can go to gloriamark.com. That's all one word. And you can read more about the book. You can learn about my research, and you can sign up for my newsletter.
I think that would have to be very interesting because, as I said, just looking at this, what a perfect title for today's world, Attention Span. This has to be a bestseller, so I think we all want that newsletter. Dr. Mark, we hear the term multitasking, and a lot of people use it as a way of bragging. I'm multitasking, I'm doing this. Is that a good, bad thing? Should we try to develop it, or should we cut it out?
The short answer is it's not a good thing.
Okay.
So we think we're doing more when we multitask, but we're actually doing less. And, as I mentioned, it causes stress. We also know that people make more errors when they multitask. In fact, there are studies of nurses and physicians who have made more errors when they multitask. Pilots make more errors when they multitask. And we also know that performance slows. It takes longer for people to do things. If you have multiple tasks, you're better off sticking to one task, either through to completion or to what's called a break point. A break point is a natural pause in the task. So, you finish reading a section of a book or reading a chapter of a book. Or if you're, say, someone who works on a budget, you finish working on a portion of that budget before you switch to something else. It's a lot easier on our minds. It's less effort for us, and it's a lot easier to resume work and reorient back to work when we finish one task to completion or when we stop at a natural break point.
So all those people who are bragging about multitasking, I can laugh at them and say, I've talked to the expert, which I'm doing right now, and that's not really helping the situation. You'd be better off doing one thing well for 3 minutes and then go on to the next, rather than being on the phone, answering an email, and writing a letter at the same time.
That's right.
What are some of the myths that you've come across about attention that a lot of us believe in and we're just unfortunately incorrect?
Yeah, so one of the myths is when we use our devices, let's try to be as focused for as long as we possibly can. And it's just not possible for people to hold long periods of sustained focus without getting exhausted, in the same way that we can't lift weights nonstop for long periods of time without, getting exhausted. So it's really important to understand that we have a limited capacity of attentional resources, to be aware that we have this limitation and to take breaks, really long, significant breaks so that we can restore that capacity, because then we can actually do more. So this idea of long periods of sustained focus doesn't work so well in reality. Another myth is the idea that we are interrupted simply from notifications. That's the main reason we're interrupted. So that's certainly one reason, but it's not the full picture. And of course, as I mentioned, we're as likely to interrupt ourselves as to be interrupted from something external to us. But there's so many other things in our environment that lead us to be interrupted. For example, the very design of the internet itself, with the node and link structure, maps onto how our memory is organized in terms of thinking by associations. So every time we go on the web, there's so many entry points into our mind's network, and it just sets off a firestorm of associations, and then we see a link that corresponds to it, and we're off on a joyride. And also, social media is designed to constrain content into very short snippets. So we end up snacking on social media. So, Twitter is short, TikTok videos are short. And so we end up switching our attention because of the constraints of the design.
I like that term, and I think that's a perfect example. What we see on social media are snacks. They're just like those mini bars that are about a little less than an inch. It's one bite, or bite size, as they will say. There was a great quote in your book, which I think says everything. It says, "The wealth of information creates a poverty of attention and a need to allocate that attention efficiently." Is there a rule or a ground rule that you'd say for people that they're listening to you, you're the expert on this, you've written the book, like rules to get your attention better? Is it drink a glass of water every hour, or run around the block? Or in second grade, the teacher used to have us stand up and touch our toes and bend over and do a sit-up or something?
Well, what your teacher taught you is actually pretty good. Okay. It's pretty good advice. One of the reasons why we get ourselves, why we're so distracted, is because we've just run out of attentional capacity, right? Our minds have limitations. We have a part of the mind called executive function, and that helps keep us on track. And when executive function gets worn out, because we're switching our attention a lot, we're using long periods of sustained focus, then it's really important to step back and take a break and restore our mental resources. And of course, one of the best things we can do is to have really good quality sleep and start your day with a full tank of attentional resources so that we have enough fuel to keep us going for a while. And then, of course, step back, take a really nice long break, build your resources back up.
If I'm doing something that really takes my, legal research, let's say, or medical research, something a bit technical that's going to take some time, and really drawing on my own personal resources, is there a method of taking that break that's best? Is it best to go outside and, if we can, either walk or jog? Is it best to just start mindlessly looking at YouTube for a few minutes, or play with the dog, or just call up a friend?
The best break that we can do is to walk outside in nature for 20 minutes. We know that people become much less stressed when they do it. In my research, we find that people have better what's called divergent thinking, which is essentially thinking of more ideas, better quality ideas. There's something about nature, a short break in nature, that's restorative. If you can't get outside, then you can move around the house, go away from your screen, do some movement, but also even a short break of doing something mindless, what I call rote activity, can actually be beneficial. And what is rote activity? It could be anything from knitting, doing something repetitive, playing solitaire. My favorite online game is an anagram game. We know that this kind of simple rote activity can be very engaging. We know it makes people happy. It has a calming ability for people. So it's not a bad thing. The problem is that when we get stuck in a rabbit hole, when we start doing some kind of rote activity, and then we can't break away. So you have to be strategic. If you're going to do something rote, set a timer, or do it before you have another appointment, so you're forced to stop. But be very strategic in doing these kinds of things.
When you began your research, and even continuing now, about attention, is there any one or two things that really struck you and you said, oh my gosh, I never knew that, and I've been violating it all these years? It might be a simple thing, maybe like the old thing of putting a rubber band on your wrist to remind you, or something like that.
Well, I would say, for myself, I used to just work straight through without taking a sufficient break. And I was getting myself really burnt out and exhausted. And then I realized how important it is to become self-aware. So I think the thing that I've learned the most from is to become aware of what you're doing as it's unfolding, because there's so many things we do that are unconscious. So, when you see your phone, you grab for it. It's unconscious. And we have to learn how to bring these kinds of unconscious activities to our conscious awareness. And when we're conscious of them, we can act on them and we can change. So when I have an urge to check news or to check social media, I have learned to recognize that urge by probing myself. And I ask myself, why do I have that urge? And I have become very reflective and understanding the reasons for why I distract myself. And it's usually because I'm procrastinating or I'm bored. And it's helped me really quite a lot to stay on task.
I'm going to stay on task because at this point in the show, it's time for me to let our audience know that you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan. Our guest today is Dr. Gloria Mark, M-A-R-K. Her book is Attention Span. And Dr. Mark, is there a website where we can learn more?
Yes, you can go to gloriamark.com.
And to our audience, if you missed part of the show or you'd like to recommend it to someone to learn more about their attention span and the people they're working with, you can go to nccradio.org. That's nccradio.org. Simply look for Secrets of Success. You can hear a podcast of the show and, of course, look for the title Attention Span with our guest, Dr. Gloria Mark. Dr. Mark, if you had a young family in front of you, and by that I mean children probably in the 5th, 6th, 7th grade, just approaching junior high, the parents who are probably in their 30s or 40s, and maybe even a grandparent who is living with them, let's say the mom or a dad. Is there a different way you would talk to them about attention to help them maximize what they could get out of either school or their work or just whatever they're doing as a hobby?
Yeah. So it's so important because kids are, first of all, there's a lot of work that's being done online. So they have the potential to be distracted by, being in front of the world's largest candy store. So, the problem is that young children's executive function ability is not yet mature. And the executive function is the part of the mind that helps us control distractions. It's what helps us prioritize things, select what we want to focus on, help keep us on track. And when kids are exposed to so many different kinds of information before their executive function is fully mature, this isn't a good thing. They're learning really bad habits, right? And so it's much better for kids to learn the importance of being able to stick to one particular task for a period of time. And another thing I would suggest is limit screen time for kids, because, putting them in front of, what I call the world's largest candy store, it's only giving them temptation to look up different kinds of information or go to social media. So limit screen time so that kids can have a chance to experience the non-digital world, which is quite beautiful.
Now, Dr. Mark, I always look for some terms in the book that will make me sound smart. I'll be honest about it. And I pulled one or two out of your book. You mentioned something about our attentional capacity scale. Now, what is that? Is that how much we can take in? And do we reach a certain point? And it would almost be, I'm going to use the analogy of food. After a certain point, you just don't want to eat anymore, even if it's ice cream or whatever your favorite food might be, potato chips. Do we reach a point where 9 o'clock or 7:30 comes and we say, that's it, I've had it for the really doing either medical, legal work, accounting work, whatever, that's using my brain?
So more or less, that's right. So, if you've had a good night's sleep, good quality sleep, you start your day with, a full attentional capacity, or what I like to think of as attentional resources. And I like to use this metaphor of a full tank of attentional resources. As the day wears on, we naturally get more and more tired. And so our resources drain a little bit. And of course, when we're switching our attention very rapidly, when we're multitasking, that tank leaks quite a bit. We're also using attentional capacity or resources for actually doing the work. And so all of these things drain our resources. If you take a really good substantial break, gives you a chance to restore that capacity, and your tank can rise to a bit higher level. But really, there does come a point where we are just mentally exhausted. And then it's really time to stop and, to call it quits for the day, and then to do something that's restorative. And usually that means detaching from work. And, and that's one of the problems, is that people have difficulty detaching from work, and they just, their minds keep going. They keep answering electronic communications like email and Slack and phone. And it doesn't really give them a chance to restore their attentional resources.
Is there anything new coming our way that we should be aware of? We already have enough things between sound, bars on the TV, on the computer, showing us on the sidelines different sports scores, new movies, etc. Anything else that's going to keep pulling at our attention? Oh,
the big thing is AI. Right. That's
artificial intelligence. Am I correct?
Artificial intelligence. Okay. And that's, there's a big question mark around that, of how that's going to influence our attention. So, we have ChatGPT, which is, uses natural language processing to be able to sound so-called intelligent. It's not really intelligent at all, but it's using dialogue that it pulls from the web to construct sentences that make it sound like there's a person behind it. It's actually just a machine. But AI has the potential to really understand what I call digital traces, the information, the behavior we do on the web, and to be able to construct profiles about us that are even much more powerful than we have today, and to really to create algorithms can really target information that's really directed to something that really goes to our basic interests. That's so hard for us to ignore. And that's going to happen.
You're scaring me. And as we run out of time, I think that's another topic for a full show, the AI. Dr. Mark, yes. We want to thank you and again remind our audience the book is Attention Span by our guest, Gloria Mark. Can you tell us once again the website?
www.gloriamark.com.
Thanks so much for being with us today, Dr. Mark. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
You've been listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan, asking you to please join us again next week at the same time when we will continue our journey to success.